My name's Alexandra and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. Today I'm breaking my silence.
Lex, how old were you when you met your abuser?
So I was 18. Like about 18 and a half, I think, and he was 23. And then I stayed with him until I was just before I turned 21.
So you were quite young when you met him?
Yeah.
What was it like to meet a perpetrator?
Well, do you know what? I met him in a really crappy, dodgy bar in my local town, and that's a red flag in itself. But I was just out, and then I was outside in the smokers area, and some guy was harassing me. He'd been harassing me for a little while, and then he started trying to like touch me and stuff like that, and I was just like, just give me some space, go away. And then he happened to be outside as well, and he sort of stepped involved, like, it was like, the girls asked you to leave her alone, like, clear off kind of thing. And I was like, oh, that's quite nice. And then like, so I started talking to him because he seemed quite nice and stuff like that. And then we literally just, we left the smokers area. I said bye to my friends, and we just carried on walking and ended up sitting down, and we were on a bench and we were talking for about 3-4 hours up until like early hours in the morning. And I was like, we should probably go home, like the sun's coming up. So that initial thing was like a movie to an 18-year-old, you know what I mean? You go on a night out and you don't expect someone to like swoop in and like help you, especially an older man. And then we just end up clicking and talking for hours. I was like, wow, this is movie love.
When you look back, can you pinpoint where the red flag started to show?
Literally the first week. So after that night out, he came back to my house, not in that sense. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I said, why don't you just come with me? We'll go get some sleep, and then we'll go out afterwards, like when we've recovered a little bit. And then so I went out, we went to see It in the cinema after that when we woke up, and he stayed at mine again the next night. And I still hadn't slept with him at this point. At 18, I wasn't like that. I wasn't giving myself away like that. So I was very secure in the fact I wasn't going to sleep with him. And obviously it was in my mum's house and stuff like that, so I was trying to be respectful of my family. And then, but he stayed again and again and again, and he was at my house for basically a week. And I was like, this is really strange, because last week he was a stranger, and now you're in my house. And then one day he showed up with a bunch of flowers for me and a bottle of wine for my mum. And he was like trying to soften them up and stuff. Because my mum, initially, as soon as she met him and I brought him back, she was like, who is this man? I don't like the look of him. I get bad vibes. She didn't like him. So she was obviously allowing him to stay, but for more of my protection, so she could keep an eye on this new guy. And then it was like, that whole week was like, it wasn't like I'd just met him on the Saturday. It's like he'd known me all these years and he was already obsessed with me. But to me, that was really nice and flattering. But now I obviously understand that's like love bombing and put in the, I don't know what it is, like laying the groundwork, I suppose. That's what he was doing, trying to make himself seem like the nice guy.
Did it feel intense at the time it was happening?
Yeah. Felt like it was like the biggest drama, like not a bad drama, but like it was all me and my friends talking about. I was talking about it at work, like I met this guy, like, and it's just, there was always something, like, and he had quite a interesting, colourful group of friends, and then obviously I'd find things out about them, and then I'd be talking about stuff that goes on in his life or little things that he'd been telling me. I mean, I knew he wasn't good. I knew that he was a bit of trouble. You know when you just look at someone and you can just tell that they're into that kind of activities, you could say. So I knew that he wasn't like the best, nicest man in the world. I knew he was dodgy. I just thought he was a nice, dodgy person. But so it was very intense like this. I was very normal. I used to go to work, come home to my family, go out on the weekend with my friends. His life was very chaotic in the sense that there'd be police involved in like him and his friendship groups, him and his family. He's getting kicked out of his mum's house, he's staying with friends. So like there was a lot of stuff that I was being introduced to at that point.
So was his life at the time impacting yours?
Yeah. But he was trying to make it subtle. So like when I met him, he was in the middle of an ongoing court case with his ex-girlfriend, where she'd got him done for something. But I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. I was dropping him off in the industrial estate kind of area, but we lived nearby, because he said that he had a job and he was working in one of the warehouses. But it wasn't until a month or two down the line, I found out that I was dropping him off to work, but he didn't have a job. He was going off to his mate's house for the day, probably doing illegal activities as work, and then coming back to me and acting as if he'd worked a day shift at this busy warehouse and he was tired and stuff. So he was already living his own original life, but trying to show it to me as in a different sense. Like, I had no idea that was going on. No idea. But it didn't take long for me to find out.
When the lies started to unravel, did he have a defence for it?
I don't really want to listen to the reasons why. I was already pregnant when I found out all of the stuff was lies. So I kind of just wanted to be like, that's the past, let's move forward for me, you and our child. So I can't even remember when I found out how I confronted him about it. I think I was trying to block it out, because my family and everyone were already so convinced that there was something wrong with him. If I was to then turn around to my mum and be like, oh, I've just found out he hasn't actually got a job, I found out this and I found out that, then that would have been more fuel for their side of things. So I just kept it quiet. I didn't want an argument to happen between us, because then I'd have to explain it. So I was very much just brush it under the carpet, just to move on from this. Like, I found out now, I know, let's move on. But my mum ended up Googling him a little while after I found out I was pregnant, and she found an article about him involved in a crime thing that happened in our town. And she obviously told me about it, and I, again, had no idea whatsoever. So I, on the spot, there and there with my mum, I was like, yeah, he told me about that. And then I also had to go back to him and be like, what's this all about? And so slowly over time, I was learning these things, but I think I was so scared of what my family would think, I didn't react to it. I just ignored it, which I really shouldn't have done.
Was there ever a sense of feeling like you needed to protect him?
Yeah, because especially because I fell pregnant quite quickly, and then he was promising me this big fairy tale, like he was gonna get a real job, he was gonna settle down, we were gonna do things together, we were gonna be preparing, we were looking at nursery stuff together and stuff like that. So in my head, we were having a fresh start. I was the one helping him get out of this horrible lifestyle he was in. I was his saviour person.
It felt like he was creating a life that you really wanted to live.
Yeah, of course. And when I was 18, I didn't want children. When I went to him, he was the one that was happy and excited. I was the one like, fuck, like, what am I going to do with a child at my age? Like, I didn't want kids anyway. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe one day, but definitely not when I was 18 years old. So he kind of talked me down and was like, no, we'll be fine, we'll do this together, like, it's me and you. And then, God, I think I did more than half of the pregnancy single.
It sounds like there was a lot of manipulation involved from him.
Yeah, of course. I think the day he met me, he already knew how different our lifestyles were, and he knew that he was going to have to portray himself in a certain way for me to even give him that chance in my life, if you know what I mean. So the first person he set himself out to me was quite an acceptable person. But as I was already stuck, I was pregnant. Like, I had his child growing in me whether I liked it or not, so I had to do something to try and keep my own dignity. Like, I wasn't going to be like, I didn't want to be a single mum at 18, I didn't want to be a mum. So if I could do it with him, I was going to try, at least. And I just believed him.
When you look back now, can you pinpoint what types of abuse you experienced from him?
So very early on, I'd say financial and emotional abuse were in place. So from very, like even when I was dropping them off to work, I was still lending him 50 quid here, like little bits of my money. Or if I was skint, I gave them the mistake of giving him my credit card once and being like, go and do what you need to do, but when you get paid from your job that you have, you can give me the money back and I'll put it back on my credit card, all fine. I think that's how I ended up finding out actually about the job, because when it comes to his payday, I never got no money for the credit he'd used.
Did the financial abuse escalate?
Yeah, so obviously it started quite subtle with just lending money and never getting it back. And then not long after I was pregnant, he used to work in London a lot, doing parties and things like that. And he took my credit card without me knowing. And then it wasn't until the end of the month statement come when I got my letter through the post, and it said that my whole credit limit was gone. I had nothing left on my credit card, and this was like my first one, because I was only 18. I was trying to build myself up. This is why I had the credit card in the first place. It wasn't to be used, it was an emergency kind of thing. And so I looked back on all these transactions and it was all in London, and I was like, I've not been to London. And that's when I realised, obviously my ex used to go there quite a lot, and I was like, I spoke to him about it, and he was just like, oh, it wasn't me, it must have been one of my mates. I was like, how would they know my PIN? I was like, you're the only person I've told it to. I was like, don't treat me like an idiot kind of thing. And then I don't even know how, but I just completely, I let it go. I was like, oh, it's fine, I'll pay it back over time and stuff like that. And I do not know why, because my credit limit was quite high and it was gone. And like I was working at this time, but obviously I was trying to prepare for a baby. It was only the early days, but I was thinking already, like, don't worry about the debt. I was like, just concentrate on buying stuff for the baby. That we'll sort that out later in time. But then it wasn't until my second credit card, then that one, same thing happened. So the limit gone, and I was like, how's that happened? Another statement's come through, and this was one I did not touch whatsoever. I think this was a credit card my mum took out for me, and I was like, how's this money gone? And that's another extra couple £100 on top of my debt. And then I was living on my own as well, so I was trying to pay all my bills. I was trying to pay for his habits and things like that. Oh no, I wasn't living on my own. That was until after I had the baby. I was living at my mum's, so I was still paying for things at my mum's house. I used to pay her money. And then I was paying for his lifestyle because he didn't have a job still. I was then paying for petrol money to get to and from work. I didn't have the spare money to try and start paying off the debt. But when we split up, when I was pregnant, it was in a matter of about a month after this happened. So when I was pregnant and I hadn't have any contact with him and stuff, I started trying to pay back the credit cards, and I was doing it little by little. He'd maxed out over one credit limit, and I managed to get it down back to the credit limit, under the credit limit, while I was pregnant, one of the credit cards. But by that time, I'd lost the job I had as a result of him before we split up. So I now didn't have the same income. I was doing a part-time cleaning job, so I had very little money. I was trying to pay for my car insurance, petrol again, because I was cleaning, so I was driving constantly. I was trying to buy baby stuff. So at this point, I'm getting myself into a spiral, and he's not even around anymore, because I'm in no position to pay back what I already owe, and it's just getting worse, and the time is going on. And then, this is jumping ahead, but when we eventually got back together after my son was born, that's when he did move into my home, and he was working, and I was as well. I was working mornings, and he'd work all day, so I'd have childcare for the morning, and he would get paid weekly, and he would have this book, and he'd get paid the same every week, and he'd write out the top, like, I can imagine the book now, and it's like his price, his amount he's going to get at the end of the week at the top, and he's breaking down what he's going to be spending his money on, and that'll be things like drugs, his smoke and stuff like that bit there, a little bit of contribution to food shopping, which would mostly be his booze, and then he'd help me out with the Sky bill a little bit, so he'd pay half each, and then that would be that money to me. And then he'd have a spare amount that he had to himself. Now, when it come to my paydays, I'd get paid monthly, he'd have my wage at the top of the page, and he'd have his spare money, but every single last penny that I had incoming, he'd have a reason to spend it somewhere. So my money would be, I wouldn't have no control over it. This was his book. He would write it out, and he would set out what we were spending our money on. And if there was a time I went into town, say with my mum, for example, and you know how it is, mothers and daughters shopping together, if you see something you like, your mum's like, oh, just treat yourself. And I remember once I used to be very strict on it, and I'd be like, no, I'm not wasting my money. And my mum used to be like, what's happened to you? She was like, you used to spend money like you didn't care. And I'd always be like, you buy it, like you get yourself it, like whatever. And I remember once I brought myself, I think it cost about £15 from Primark, cheap as chips, right? I thought one thing can't hurt. I went home and I got in trouble, but that's how it felt for going out of the book, like out of his budget. And never again would I have done that.
That sounds so controlling. At
Yeah.
the time, did it seem like it was controlling?
At first I thought it was a really good idea. I was like, yeah, we can see where our money's going, where it's coming in and what's coming out. And over time, I realised, like, what have I actually got in this last 6 months, for example? Like, there was things where he'd buy himself new clothes, new work shoes, new work this, new work that. But there was never a single thing on them lists that was like a nice thing for me. Although there would be stuff for my son, which I used to always make sure that was on there, like his clothes as he's getting bigger. But for me personally, I don't think there was one single thing ever mapped out for me having it. And if it was, it'd be like the £20 takeaway we're going to share together on Friday night when we watch a film. That would be it. Like, that would be my treat, that we're going to have a nice Friday night in together, and I'd get some of the dinner that he wanted to order. Because I could never choose the takeaway either, because it wasn't that simple. I could never choose what was on the telly. Like, we'd sit down to watch what he wanted to watch and go to bed when he was ready. That's how it was every week, because he got paid weekly, so this would be a Friday thing. On repeat, literally.
Lex, can you tell me a bit about what it was like whilst you were separated from him and how he integrated himself back into your life?
So I split up with him just after my 12-week scan. And that was for a whole different bunch of reasons. But initially, it was because he was going back to prison. So this was just before Christmas, and he was going back to prison just after Christmas. So for a whole bunch of reasons, we ended up splitting up then. And I thought, I'm going to start the new year on my own. I'm going to start the new year pregnant. I'm going to carry... I just got this little cleaning job that I'd had because I lost my job that I had because of him. So all around Christmas going back, I lost my job, we broke up and things like that because of him. And then I was starting the new year with my new job, being single, being pregnant obviously, and I was just looking to just do me, carry on, try and go back to normal, forget the last 3 months had happened kind of thing. And it went perfectly to plan. So I went up to my due date in July. So all the way from January to July, I was on my own, working, preparing for a baby, and things was going great. Didn't hear from him. I knew he was in prison. His friend had told me that he's gone away now. He said he doesn't want anything to do with you. I was like, cool, that's fine. And then my son was just a few weeks old, and I'd just moved into my flat with him. And I got a message on Facebook from his mum's Facebook. And the message said, it's so-and-so, just got out of prison, can I see my son? That's literally the message I received. And for some reason, after the 8 months that had just gone by of me happy, living my life, I was like, yeah, of course you can. I was like, when do you want to come around, this weekend? Literally, just straight jumped back. I don't know what it was. I think I was quite happy to hear from him in some senses, because I was like, I was in a little baby bubble. I was in my home. I had my little boy. And I thought, obviously when my little boy was born, it did make me sad that his dad wasn't around. So I think when he just came back, I just jumped at the opportunity. And I think that probably comes from my daddy issues, you could say. So I just allowed him back into my life. And I'd say 2 weeks after he met my son, somehow we were trying to make it work again. And yeah, it was different the second time around, very different.
What sort of tactics did he use the second time round?
I think it was, I don't know, he had his life together more, I'd say, when he got out of prison. Like, he started working, he started working out and taking a lot of supplements and stuff to try and better his health, kind of thing. And I thought, maybe this is gonna go somewhere. Maybe he will actually reform this time. He doesn't want to go back to prison, like he said. So I kind of took that on, and I was trying to support him in that. I was trying to support his new job. I was trying to support him getting to and from his new job, so I'd often do lifts for him and things like that. And I was trying to support his eating and all that. I don't understand all that gym stuff. I don't get it. But I was trying to get it to help him. And so I think him showing me the kind of guy he wanted to be, I think that made me hold on to the fact it's in there somewhere. I just have to draw it out. So I think that's a big tactic he used, but he slowly went backwards.
At what point did you start to notice then that actually he wasn't going to change?
Probably the drinking, because he'd come home from work every single day with, you know, them little blue carrier bags you get from your little local newsagents, filled with cans every day. Come home and I'd be like, I'll have a drink. I'd be like, yeah, just a couple. And then it'd come to his payday on Friday. They'd be like, oh, it's payday today. Let's get a bit of extra. But the thing is, I did not drink. I did not drink at this point. I didn't like drinking. Ever since I found out I was pregnant, I hadn't had a drink, an alcoholic drink once. And I think the more I saw it, the more put off I was about it, especially because I was living in a flat with a baby and a drunk. I thought, one of us got to be sober here. I was like, I'm not about to turn into an alcoholic. I was like, I can't leave my son asleep in the next room while we're both pissed, kind of thing. But he'd always try and get me to drink. He'd always try and be like, oh, I brought you this. And I'm like, but I'm not going to drink it, you know I'm not. So then he'd get annoyed with the fact I wasn't going to drink it. And he'd sit there and neck the whole bottle of wine, and be like, well, if you're not going to have it, then I'll fucking have it. And I think he knew I was not going to drink it. It was just an excuse for him to have probably some more alcohol. And when I tried to have conversations with him about cutting down and how they'd always backlash, or he'd have 2 days sober and then come home the third day absolutely smashed out of his face, that's when I just knew that this man is never going to change.
So his alcoholism was a big part of the abuse that you experienced. Was there any other substances involved?
Yeah, so steroids, for gym purposes. So a lot of extra testosterone and things like that. And he used to smoke weed on a daily basis. Often on a Friday, he'd have a little cocaine binge. And towards the end of our relationship, I found and threw away 3 crack pipes that I never once mentioned to him that I'd found. He'd never once mentioned to me that they were thrown away. But on each evening of me throwing one of them away, it was absolute horror. The silent treatment, and then I'd ask him, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking to me? He'd be like, nothing. And then he'd start making comments about why he couldn't trust me, about the fact that I go through his stuff, but he would never say what he knew I'd thrown away. I'd never say what I knew I'd thrown away, but he would then, the arguments would start. Then the neighbours would call the police would come, the police would show up at the door, make sure everything's all right. He'd talk them down, be like, yeah, everything's fine. As soon as the police would then leave, that's when it would then get worse and things would start getting thrown. I'd get shoved, pushed, pinched, just something, even if it's just minor, he'd do something that would, like, I don't know what it was. If I got hit in a slight way or pushed or whatever, it was like somehow I'd know, right, stop arguing with him because it's going to get worse. So as soon as I'd had that, I would try and leave the argument if I could, because for social service reasons, I didn't want a second call out in the same night from the police, because that's just more things I'm going to have to talk to my social worker about. So I don't know how to explain it, but I knew why we were arguing that day. He would just never talk about the fact it come down to his drug problem, because he didn't have a drug problem. I could never confront him about his substance issues because it would end up going the same way.
You knew that the cycle of punishment was going to come.
Yeah.
Tell me what your leaving process was like.
My leaving process probably went on for about 5 months, I'd say. So I eventually left him in October. So this is going back to the sort of summer. When obviously in the summer everyone drinks a little bit more because the weather's nice and stuff like that, but he was coming, it was the drinking for me that was really, I think I could deal with the arguing and the abuse more than I could the drinking, because him sober arguing and abusive was nothing compared to the drunk him abusive and stuff, because sober, never lay a hand on me. If anything, he'd just storm out and go out for the day. Come home late at night pissed, which was fine. Absolutely, you can go out for the day and clear off and leave me the hell alone, it's fine. But if he was at home, drunk, and it started, then that's when, I don't know, there was so much, so them times were so much more traumatising. So when the drinking was getting worse and it was becoming a more constant argument, I was then having to talk to my social worker constantly about why all these police calls were happening. But to the social workers, we weren't together. So the social workers didn't think we were together, but I was somehow having to explain why all these police call-outs were happening to my flat with him. So trying to keep on top of like a double life almost, because I was having to keep up with the lies I was telling them. I was having to sometimes lie to cover my own back in front of my ex because I didn't want him finding certain things out. Like if he'd been to work for the day and I'd popped out to see my mum, I did not want him knowing that. So it was like a constant amount of lies, hiding from everyone. And I just knew I was killing myself. Like I'd lost a ridiculous amount of weight. I wasn't talking to my friends and family anymore. I was struggling with my mental health. I couldn't work because it was physically impossible with him, because I'd constantly have to be on the phone to him, or with one of my jobs, he came down there once and caused a scene and it was embarrassing for me to ever return, kind of thing. And then one day he came home drunk and off of his face on coke, and he proposed to me. And I knew I'd be stupid to say no to a man in that state. So I said yes, I agreed to it. And it was probably about 10 o'clock at night. I was literally in my dressing gown in front of my washing machine, and there's some drunk man on one knee in front of me just saying, be my wife, be my wife. It wasn't like it was a nice romantic gesture or anything. It was literally, he was like, we'll be together, we'll get a house together, you can put me on the birth certificate finally, you can put me on the tenancy. He was like, we'll do this properly. It wasn't like I love you, I want to be with you, let's spend the rest of our lives together. He was literally saying, get me on the birth certificate, put me on the tenancy, let me own you basically for the rest of our life. And I said yes. And then all my friends and my family know I don't want to get married. Like me in a white dress walking down the aisle is sickening to me. I couldn't imagine anything worse. So everyone started asking me questions. They're like, you get married? Are you all right? And I was like, yeah, fine. And all my family were so angry because I had left him for about a week or two, but obviously he manipulated his way back in. And they're like, you've gone back to him and now you're engaged. Like, my cousin fuming with me, like she stopped talking to me. So I knew what I had to do. I was just getting there. And then the next and final, last incident that happened, there was no time to hide it from the police anyway. When they came in, their body cam footage would have seen the blood and the mess and everything. But I decided to sit down then that time and write my whole statement and say never, not letting him back in again. Not this time.
Lex, what has your life been like since leaving your abuser?
I don't know, just breathe better, breathe easier. Even though it's been 2.5 years, I think in the last 2 months, I'd say I'm finally able to be quite confident around men. Not in the sense that I'm looking for anything, just like when you're out and like, before if a man looked at me, I'd be like, don't look my direction. But now I don't know what it is, I feel lighter. I feel like I can do what I wanted to do. I feel like I won't ever let someone tell me where I can spend my money again. I'm not going to live off no lists. I'm not going to change my behaviour or lie to my friends and family for someone else's actions. And I'm in my life for me and my son now. I'm not doing it to save no one else. I'm doing it to save myself, you could say.